Hello again to another Agricolor Reacts, and today we'll be watching 10 events shorter than you realize from top 10s. So let's just go, let's just see, because I learned recently there is definitely one, and that was the gold rush that lasted only 10 years. I always thought that was longer than
welcome!
That. Okay, let's just start from the beginning and actually show you what's going on, what we're watching, so there you go.
So welcome to another episode of Top 10s. I'm your interim host, Carl Smallwood, and today we're talking about 10 historical events that were likely far shorter than you ever realised.
I wonder if the top
Sometimes
gold
when
rush
we
gonna
learn
be there
about the
too.
past colours our impression and understanding of it. Minor events can be made to seem huge and extremely significant, and major ones can be downplayed or totally overlooked. It's hard to be on the lookout for all the different biases that can colour what we learn about events that we weren't even alive to witness. One of the strangest ways our understanding of history can be manipulated deals with time specifically. Some periods or events that receive a lot of attention were far more short-lived than many of us in the present ever stopped to realise. For example, consider number 10. The Wild West was only the Wild West for about 30 years.
Really?
At this point, there have been more movies made about the Wild West than most of us could ever hope to watch in a lifetime. The time period was immortalised on film, largely in part because film had just been invented on the tail end of the American frontier era, so stories of that time were a natural fit for what came next. As film really grew and became a phenomenon for storytelling, movie theatres took off, and in the early 19-teens, movie studios sprang up in Hollywood. Westerns became one of the biggest genres, and for over 100 years, studios have been making them, although obviously not as many today. It's all about superheroes now. As popular as the Western genre was in the 40s and 50s, you'd think the Wild West was a massive part of American history, but it lasted a relatively short 30 years. And what we think of as the Wild West began at the end of the Civil War in 1865. That era ended at the same time film really began. In fact, around 1895 to 1897 or so. And nearly everything we know or think about the Wild West, about Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, and every other famous cowboy, took place in that relatively short 30-year time period. The Wild West
they knew each other,
with the massacre at Wounded Knee, and then the 1891 census, which declared there were no longer a frontier and all the land of the West had been claimed. By 1895, a mostly arbitrary date that many sources use, the age of lawlessness had all but been resolved, and the Wild had been removed from the West. By the 1900s, the age of American industry was the final nail in the coffin, which means it's very likely that if you watched every cowboy movie and TV show back to back, it would constitute more time than the Wild West
actual thing existed.
And speaking of the Wild West and not lasting very long, number 9, the gunfight at the OK Corral lasted less than a minute. Speaking of the Wild West, one single event stands out.
I don't think I ever heard about that one.
The mythos of the Wild West cowboys and outlaws mystique, and that's the gunfight at the OK Corral. This infamous fight has been immortalised dozens of times on film and is generally one of the climactic moments of any film about Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday. Though there was a long build
okay, so probably I heard about it, just not with the name.
McClory gang, notorious and violent
some
thieves
movies
and
about
cattle
them.
rustlers near the town of Tombstone. Things came to a head on October 26, 1881 at 3 in the afternoon when two groups clashed in a violent gunfight. In total, 30 shots fired back and forth, and the whole thing took a reported 30 seconds. That was it. 3 Clantons died in the fight, and Earp's side was suffering from non-fatal wounds. Though it's been subject of some debate over the years, it's largely been agreed that Virgil Earp, Wyatt's brother, was the first man to fire his gun, followed by Doc Holliday. Number 8. The US has only had the national debt paid off for a single year throughout its history. The US government has been in debt since it began.
Really?
Literally, the government started in debt. The US Treasury points out that the government incurred $75 million in debt during the Revolutionary War in 1791, and it's been going strong ever since. However, there once was an extremely brief moment of reprieve. President Andrew Jackson was the only US president in history to pay off the debt for 1 year. It is the only year in US history where the entire country was debt-free. It was January 8, 1835, when it was announced that the US national debt had been paid in full. And this was thanks in no small part to Andrew Jackson's utter distrust of the banking system. He ended up liquidating the Second Bank of the United States, selling off land to the West, and returning the country's initial investment plus profit, which was distributed amongst the states. Jackson also blocked pretty much every single spending bill he could and vetoed many programs that would call for money being spent. This led to a real estate bubble and a depression that caused a new debt, and the country has never been able to escape it since. And I think there is a website out there where you can just track the national debt, and it's a couple of $1 trillion at the moment, I believe. Let's double check check. Why not? Wouldn't that be fun? If we just check, it's not just for show. So national debt, November 30th, it is 33.17 trillion US dollars at this point in time. Whew, which led to the evergreen tweet of, who do we owe $30 trillion to? Just the Decepticons. That's like more money than exists on
that's
Earth.
actually a good question.
Speaking of more money than a human could ever hope to spend. Number 7, the Beatles were only a band for 7 years. So if you Google best rock band of all time, you're going to see the Beatles on a lot of lists. The Beatles have 183 million certified album sales. They released 13 studio albums, which makes them far and away the top-selling musical act of all time. For anyone curious about the numbers here, that's almost 100 million more records than Michael Jackson, and 30 million more than their closest competitor, which is, unexpectedly, and of all people, Garth Brooks. So well done, Garth Brooks, for almost being as successful as the Beatles. For all that incredible fame, you'd think that the Fab Four had been together for far longer than they actually were, considering their fame has lasted half a century and is still going strong. The Beatles, though, only performed as a group for 7 years, from 1963 to 1970, and in that time, they produced 20 number one singles and over 40 top 40 releases, as well as, the aforementioned 13 albums. And I guess I kind of have to mention this because it's just one of those things that always sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
There was a story a few months ago now about the artist Ice Spice, where Ice Spice had more plays that month on Spotify than the Beatles had. And it was framed as, is Ice Spice more successful than the Beatles? It's like, well, Ice Spice is certainly very successful, but you have to
never heard about her.
Keep in mind here that the Beatles' last studio release as a band was 50 years ago. It's okay, let's fast forward 50 years and see how well Ice Spice is doing, and then we can start to compare them. It's I just remember my mind being blown by that. It's more impressive that the Beatles are still getting almost as many streams as the current hottest artist in the world.
Yep.
Anyway, number 6. The Pony Express was only around for a year and a half. One last trip to the Wild West, we promise. I guess it's kind of meta that we have 3 entries on the Wild West, one of which is, it didn't last as long as you thought that it did, but a lot of stuff did happen. And one of those things was the Pony Express, which started in 1960. And at a time before automobiles, it was a quick and efficient way to deliver mail by a relay of horses. One rider would take a letter, races to the next fresh rider, and so on all across the country. And as a result of this system, they could cover 1,800 miles in just 10 days, which was far faster than any other previous mail service. And because of all the Western expansion, people in the older established cities in the East needed quick communications with those out West, and the Pony Express was the answer to this problem. Right up until it wasn't. Even as the Express was getting underway, a transcontinental telegraph service was being built to connect both sides of the country. And as a result, the Pony Express began service on April 3rd, 1860. On October 26th, 1861, the telegraph connection between New York and San Francisco was finalized, and the Pony Express was officially terminated just a year and a half after it had started. And number 5, it only took 8 days to film The Blair Witch Project.
Still haven't seen the movie.
I know there's going to be people in the comments screaming that The Blair Witch Project wasn't the first found footage movie. However, it is widely considered to have been the movie that popularized and introduced the mass audiences to the idea of a found footage. It did what few movies can do, and it revolutionized film by just introducing audiences to what was essentially a new, or at the very least, nascent genre. There were other found footage films that existed before, as noted, but The Blair Witch was the one that introduced the concept to the audiences at large and started a boom in the genre that continues, rather annoyingly, to this day. It's also one of the most successful found footage horror movies even to this day, raking in nearly $250 million at a cost of about $35,000 to shoot, which, in addition to making it one of the most successful found footage horror movies, makes it just arguably one of the most successful movies of all time when you consider the amount it cost to make comparative to the amount of money that it made. For anyone out there who doesn't remember the hype around the Blair Witch Project, people lined up around the block to see this movie, and it caused a sensation for its groundbreaking viral marketing campaign. And the fact that people did legitimately believe that it was real footage shot by real people who'd been murdered in the woods. And for all the impact and buzz and legacy of the movie, it's remarkable to learn that it was the culmination of just 8 days of work. It took just 8 days to film the movie from start to finish, and then it was off to editing. And I've actually researched a lot on the Blair Witch because it's just a fun movie to research because it's so interesting. It's this part of film history, and I like learning about film history. And one of the things that cracks me up is that the people making it had no idea what was going on. Like, the 3 actors in the film basically didn't know what the deal was, and they were literally just walking around the woods looking for dead drops by the directors and producers, who would just leave them food and notes of what their character was feeling that day. And one of the things that they did to get them to feel more tense and just to start arguments that felt organic, which they were because the cast ended up just arguing for real a lot of the time, is giving them less and less food and contradictory instructions. And maps that were wrong but told not to share with the other members of the cast. The crew would also hide in the woods with boom boxes playing animal noises and stuff like that. And one detail that I love, and it's not in the film because it was cut because it ended up looking too stupid, is they tried to dress up a member of the crew as the monster by making them wear pure white long johns and wear pool noodles in his sleeves to have long crazy arms, and he was going to wander in the woods in the middle distance and just howl like a monster as the cast saw him. But they never ended up filming that because the cast didn't spot him or hear him. Oh! They just had this dude in long johns walking around the woods doing this, and they never got it in the film because the cast didn't notice it. I made an entire video about this for my channel Fact Fiend, which may be linked below if this gets left in. I love the movie. So, and I've talked about it at length many times before, and we'll no doubt do in the future. But moving swiftly on, number 4, the shortest war in history, the Anglo-Zanzibar War, lasted less than 1 hour. So there's always a war going on somewhere. Most wars seem to last about 3 to 4 months, according to historians. But historically, there have been some very notable exceptions to this rule. For example, some wars have lasted for over 700 years, at least officially. And on the opposite end of that scale is the Anglo-Zanzibar War, which lasted all of about 40 minutes. So after the treaty was signed between Germany and England regarding Zanzibar, the Brits put a friendly sultan in charge and took on Zanzibar as a British protectorate. The sultan died some 3 years later, potentially poisoned by his cousin, who quickly took over leadership. But that's a story for another day. Britain did not want someone in charge that they hadn't appointed, so they told the new sultan to step off. He responded by gathering a military force to his palace of about 3,000 soldiers and some artillery to defend the palace. The sultan then locked himself inside. The British had already had 2 warships on standby and sent for some reinforcements. Several more arrived over the next 2 days, and Britain officially requested that the sultan just give up. The sultan called their bluff, saying he didn't think that they'd attack. Britain responded by basically saying, well, we don't want to, but we will if you make us. Please don't make us shell your palace to the ground. And that was the end of formal communications. At 9 a.m. on August 27th, the British ships opened fire. 2 minutes later, the Sultan's defences were all but destroyed. The palace was on the verge of collapse, and the Sultan apparently fled, and 38 minutes later, the flag was removed from the palace, and it was taken by the British. The entire war lasted some 40 minutes, and do you know what didn't even manage to make it to 40 minutes? Number 3, the first Oscars ceremony, which was only 15 minutes long. The 74th Annual Academy Awards aired in 2002, and the broadcast was just shy of 4.5 hours long. These lengthy broadcasts have routinely been criticised for just being too long and boring to watch. It's funny to think of how far we've come and how much more refreshing it must have been back in 1929 when the Academy held the first award ceremony.
How many?
It lasted a brisk 15 minutes. In 1929, it wasn't on TV, of course, which helped cut down the time anyone was willing to spend. There was also just one speech given, and only 270 people attended, at $5 a head, and dinner was included. And all the winners had known 3 months in advance that they were winning, or I guess if they weren't winning. The ceremony had only 15 statues to hand out, and only 2 of the 5 nominated showed up to actually receive them. 2 others were travelling, and 1 had gone back to Germany, where he lived. So number 2, Mr. Bean only ran for 15 episodes. Even if everyone doesn't recognise Rowan Atkinson's name, pretty much everyone who's been online for more than
15 episodes
minutes knows his face. Atkinson, who's been acting for decades, is the man behind the iconic character of Mr. Bean, the awkward, mostly silent, perplexing-looking clod of a man who bumbles into countless goofy situations. But those situations aren't as countless as you think. Atkinson has made the character famous thanks to his remarkable aptitude for physical comedy, which includes some masterful face making. And just a little bonus fact here about Atkinson's foray into comedy. He basically trial runned the character of Mr. Bean by going to a comedy show that was held in multiple languages, and he said, I want to be on the French docket, And they asked him, do you speak French? He said, no, but my comedy routine doesn't have any words in it. And they heavily advised him not to do the routine to an audience that didn't speak English. He said, no, my routine doesn't have any words in it. I want to see if it can translate to an international audience. And for anyone curious, the routine was just Rowan Atkinson looking at a list of names and just making faces as he tried to read through them. So, and for a lot of people, Mr. Bean was a staple part of their comedy upbringing. It's for that reason, alongside all the beams and gifts that the show has spawned, that it's kind of surprising to learn there are only 15 episodes of the show ever produced. As for the numbers, the very first Mr. Bean aired in January 1990. Episode 2 came out 11 months later. Episode 3 rushed out just 2 months after that. Then it was another 10 months, and it would go on like that for 6 seasons, never releasing more than 4 episodes in a single year. The character has also appeared in a few shorts, had his own movie, and even an appearance at the Olympics, but for the most part, that initial 15-episode run is all the world ever saw of Mr. Bean. Romeo and Juliet takes place over about 5 days. So yeah, we're fudging it a little bit here. This isn't a historical event, but it's certainly surprising to learn that Romeo and Juliet takes place in just under a week. So Romeo and Juliet, one of the most well-known plays ever written, and even all these years later is still used to reference a number of romantic ideals. We still call a romance-minded guy a Romeo because of this play, and people who've never read the ending compare it to Young Love all of the time. And while the story follows the meeting, romance, and tragic end of these young lovers, who are, for the curious, 16 and 13 if you recall, the entire story takes place over a single work week, which is just 5 days. And so in that 5 days they go from who's that handsome gentleman to, well, guess I'm going to kill myself. And even the most generous reading of the play has Romeo and Juliet dying on the dawn of the 6th day. Whirlwind romance or what? So I hope everybody out there enjoyed this video, found it entertaining, informative, and educational. I certainly found the script to be all 3 of those things. And if you think so, go give the author Ian Forty a follow on social media and let them know. I'm sure they'd appreciate that. Follow me on social media if you're so inclined, like the video, comment with feedback, suggestions, anything you'd like to cover in future, subscribe for more videos like this, and as always, go out there and have the day you all deserve. Cheers.
Okay. No, that was okay.
So welcome to another episode of Top 10s.
Whoops. Okay. So, what did we learn? The Wild West lasted only 30 years. So it kind of goes in the thing that I said in the beginning about the gold rush as well. It was just 10 years long. And then the pony stuff? What the heck? 1.5 years? That's all? Damn. We really have our perception of time is really muffled, I guess, or bumbled. I don't know what to say, but the word would be perfect for that. I was gonna say that was good, but I'm not going to make this one longer than it should be. So thank you very much for watching, and I see you tomorrow. Bye.